Hello, everyone. Joshua Gilliland here, one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me tonight is Thomas Harper, and we're going to dissect The Prisoner from The Mandalorian, Episode 6. Thomas, how you doing?
I'm not locked up on a New Republic high security prison ship, and any day that that's the case is a good day in my book.
Nor are you wearing stormtrooper shoes. So again,
This is true.
I mean, at least they weren't like slippers. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
This episode, somebody described it as the Italian Job turns into Aliens, and that's kind of right. It's Ocean's 11 meets Alien, and it works beautifully.
Yeah, that's not inaccurate.
And that's how you do an homage. Some people have been critical of the Sanctuary episode because it's just like it's so Seventh Samurai or Magnificent Seven, and this was let's take a couple things and put them together and see what we get.
Yeah. Well, I'm of the mindset that Star Wars has always borrowed heavily from other films, other genres. It's never been uniquely its own thing except for the universe that it's in and the characters and ships and aliens and whatnot. So it doesn't bother me at all. If you're taking a formula that works and putting it into the Star Wars universe, by all means, entertain me.
Yes. So let's talk about the characters in this. So we have Mark Boone Jr., who plays Ranzer Malk, who's kind of like imagine the biker in space who's organizing crime. Mayfeld, played by Bill Burr, ex-Imperial sharpshooter, and makes a point that he was never a stormtrooper because he can hit things. Was it Xana? It
Xi'an.
sounds like Xi'an. Yeah, it's. I initially thought it was spelled with an S. Natalia Teen, who's been in both Harry Potter and Game of Thrones. And she plays the crazy ex-killer girlfriend that you don't want in your life. We have Berg, who's played by Clancy Brown of Highlander fame. And his voice is still the same 35 years later, so that's cool.
You've heard him all over Star Wars Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels as well. He's been a number of characters. Savage Opress. He was Ryder Azadi, the governor or the former governor of Lothal and Rebels. He's been quite a few folks.
And the former governor in Rebels, probably looked the most like him in real life. That
That's true.
they modeled the character after him. The man's got a solid voice, and it's like looking. I was like, hey, you've aged well. Good for you. We have the Droid Zero by Richard. Was it Aladade?
Iode. Yeah, I wasn't an It Crowd watcher, but yeah, that's his call to fame amongst other projects.
And finally, actually two more. Quinn by Ismail Cordova, and Davin, he was the voice of Anakin Skywalker in the Clone Wars, and it's nice seeing him get a live action appearance, and plus the cameos at the end, and we'll save that for the end. So we go off on this mission, and it's a bad group to have on the Razor Crest, that they need to use the ship to go drop in on this New Republic prison ship that's mostly manned by droids. And the Droid Zero is going to fly because they have to do this really bizarre maneuver to stay in the transport's blind spot. So there's like character development with them interacting with the Mandalorian, with the other conspirators wanting Mando to take off his helmet, and they're just being schmucks. It's like annoying bros that you immediately want to throw out the airlock. And Baby Yoda is discovered, and there's a discussion of, who's this a pet? And Mayfeld picks up Baby Yoda right before they do the aerobatics to stay in the blind spot, and Baby Yoda is dropped. Let's talk about potential child abuse with that. And Thomas, what are your thoughts?
Well, it infuriated me, and it's funny. My wife watched this for the first time about 2 hours ago, sort of prepping for the recording, and she also got enraged. It was her first time watching the episode, and she about jumped off the couch when he went up in the air. Interestingly, every state has sort of a slight different take on what constitutes child abuse, but across most states, you're going to find some sort of mental element. In other words, the act is one thing. Hurting the child is half of the battle, but you've got to have the mens rea, the sort of intent level there to have criminal culpability. And at least in Pennsylvania, you've got to have the act be done intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. And I don't think in this scene there's any question that Mayfield, I don't think, was intentionally or knowingly trying to drop the baby. He sort of does the fake with Baby Yoda, which was bad enough. It made me want to punch through my screen and hit him right in the jaw. But he seems to think that Baby Yoda is really cute, and it's like changing his mind about owning a pet. I don't think there's really any ill will there. And it's not until Zero does that crazy maneuver, like airplane style, where he actually drops him. And so then the question is, was this reckless? And I don't know. It's not like Mando has the Baby Yoda strapped properly into a rear-facing car seat or anything. He's just sort of like in this container on the ship with the door closed, and he kind of threw some blankets in there. It's like the Mandalorian. It's like the Star Wars equivalent of like when you catch a bug as a kid and you put a leaf and a stick in there, and you're like, you're good.
I don't agree with that. It's a close quarter ship. That's a bunk. It's the little bedroom for the little guy. And I know, like you're an army guy, you're used to sleeping on the ground like an animal, but on board a ship, it's tight quarters. That looks like a comfortable bunk. That's normal for a ship. So I don't see that as a problem. It's a tight little compartment with a bunk, and that's where you would sleep. So
Well, then that begs the question. He takes him out. Mayfield takes him out of his little nest there that Mando has built for him. Is that reckless to do that, knowing that they're kind of flying through space at high speed?
yeah, I don't know if it's reckless. I think he's just a jerk, and I mean there are other reasons to punch him. This would I don't think this is grounds for liability, but it's grounds not to like him. And you then have to pivot towards Zero with like, hey, you didn't announce that you were about to go do crazy aerobatics that everyone knew would be wild and bonkers with. There are going to be like 7 turns at like 30 degrees, and we're going to go on a y-axis and then a z-axis, and it's
When
it's going to
it's a crazy enough flight
suck.
pattern that Mando doesn't even think that it can be done. He doesn't think that he can fly it, and that's where Ranzar corrects him that Zero is going to be doing the flying.
Yeah, you'd want to strap in for that because so people don't go flying around the cabin. So there's from like a common carrier perspective, like the seatbelt sign was not turned on and everyone gets tossed around. So like that's a bad on Zero. It's not Mayfeld is just a schmuck at this point that I didn't like. I mean, granted, the way the actor's playing him, it's fantastic because you instantly think schmuck. Uh, so he did a very good job of be a schmuck, lean into it.
And I would argue that Mayfield clearly pissing off Mando as he did is probably a bigger problem than any kind of criminal liability that he may or may not face. So I think he took the worst of the two.
Yeah, that's just a bad life choice. So here's a guy who's really good at killing people, and I'm going to upset him just cause.
By hurting the
And
one, make him go John Wick on you.
it's just, how dumb are you? It's like, well, he was an Imperial. It's just, you picked the wrong side, and apparently because you enjoy violence, and look what that gets you.
Yeah.
Now, Now, we do get into some weird issues with the theory of conspirators, because what they're doing and raiding a New Republic ship would fall into what's known as a conspiracy, because it's this enterprise to go out and raid. And there are all kinds of legal issues with being a conspirator, that they're clearly doing this as this operation to get paid to go bust out a prisoner. Why don't we let's get into the issue of like accessory liability, and let's talk about the organizer, Ranzer.
Well, so the episode starts out before they ever take off on the mission, and Ranzar, they don't go into full details about the sort of operation he's running, but it's clear that it's a safe haven of sorts. And his interaction with Mando at the beginning about not asking questions, but having heard rumblings about some bad dealings with the guild is actually a really good comparison of what is and isn't accessory liability. Because when Mando comes aboard, Ranzar doesn't seem to really know what had happened before. And in fact, he makes a point not to ask any questions about what may have led Mando to this point needing safe haven there. And with accessory liability, an accessory is somebody who assists with the commission of a crime, but doesn't actually take part in it. And it's different slightly from an accomplice, because an accessory doesn't have to be physically present and actively involved in the crime. You can be an accessory to a crime after the fact. The crime could be completed, say a bank robbery. You could be the guy at the safe house that's letting everybody in to help them avoid getting caught by the police. But the key is that you've got to have knowledge of the crime that's being committed and then an act. So some sort of help, encouragement, that sort of thing. Um, that's where the difference comes in terms of what brought Mandalorian to that station versus this prison heist, because it doesn't seem that Ranzar has enough there to have knowledge of the crime that was committed vis-a-vis the child and all of the prior acts before this episode. But he cooked up this whole plan for the prison escape. And even though he doesn't step foot on the Razor Crest to go on the mission, I think very clearly he's going to have some level of accessory liability, uh, because presumably the whole plan that we see there at the end is that they're bringing Quinn back to that station.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Well, let's pivot to the prison escape, and since that's a crime, it's like we, we don't want people doing that. So let's break down the prison escape issues.
Yeah, well, it's like you put a point on it. It is a crime, and I put this on the outline because it's a separate crime in and of itself. So it, oftentimes it seems like we see the goofier ones that pop up in the news from time to time, where like a prison guard is helping. I think there was I'm trying to think what state it was out of. There was this love triangle between a prison worker and a couple of the prisoners she helped escape, and she was sneaking in tools and stuff and lunch meat and just different things like that to help these guys get out. But in Virginia, for example, if you've got somebody lawfully detained as a prisoner, and that doesn't have to, it can be pre-conviction. It doesn't have to be somebody that's faced trial and gotten convicted by a jury or a guilty plea. But if they've been lawfully charged and you in any way assist their escape, including taking part in the actual escape itself, that is a separate crime, separate and apart from all the other crimes that you might commit in furtherance of that escape plan. So the murder, assaults, whatever else might take place. And at least in Virginia, it's treated as a fairly serious crime, even if the whole thing is just an attempt. And it's a felony level crime. You get at least a year in prison, not more than 5 years, which to me seems a little light, but the idea is if you're helping somebody escape from prison, you've probably committed several other crimes. So that 1 to 5 years is probably the least that you're having to worry about.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of time added up for your new life in the federal penal system or state penal system or Commonwealth, wherever you are. So yeah,
The prison ship. I don't.
yeah. Well, there's a reason why we don't do prison ships in the United States, but yes, the unpleasantness during the Revolutionary War. But let's yeah, yes, that brings us to the actual conspiracy. And I'll get into this because uh, it's also known as Pinkerton liability, and that allows an actor to be held for substantive crimes committed by his co-conspirators in certain circumstances. And that defendant can be held vicariously liable for a substantive offense committed by another member of the conspiracy if, one, the defendant was a party to the conspiracy, two, the offense was within the scope of the unlawful project, three, the offense was committed in furtherance of the conspiracy, and four, the defendant could have reasonably foreseen the offense as a necessity or natural consequence of the unlawful agreement, which is going to get important for when someone gets killed. So, like, was that part of the plan? Was that within the scope? Was that in furtherance of the conspiracy? Was it reasonably foreseeable? Those are all questions when we talk about the very short life of Devin. Of I just thought I was going to fly the spaceship. Well, no. Uh, nope. Uh, like I want to get your take on this because we have Mayfeld and we get a Reservoir Dogs type standoff with whether or not to kill the one human on board the New Republic ship and whether or not that was part of the conspiracy or not.
Yeah, I absolutely think so because I don't think Mando can get off by saying, well, the other criminals told me that there was no live human being on this ship. In fact, they were in such a rush to get into this security office, command center, whatever you want to call it, that they ran right past Zero's warning that there was a biological signal behind the door. So that's not much foreseeability, but the idea that a New Republic high security prison ship wouldn't have a soul aboard and it's all just humans. I think that's a little bit of a pipe dream for Mandalorian. I don't think a jury is going to believe him when he says it was unforeseeable that a human would be involved in guarding this ship. And so, the core of this is that they're engaged in a really dangerous mission to free a prisoner. They all understand the goal here and the dangers that are inherent. Neutralizing him was absolutely done in furtherance of the conspiracy. And you get into an issue here where Mando didn't throw the knife, didn't pull the trigger, throw the knife in Davin's case, but that intent of Gion's, I think, would transfer to him. And you see that concept, it's sort of separate and apart from, it's intertwined, I guess, with the felony murder piece that we'll talk about. But there is a concept within the law where one member of the conspiracy's intent can transfer over to you, and it has to do with foreseeability. And so I think it's going to be tough for the Mandalorian to argue his way out of the foreseeable aspect, and I think he's going to be looking at trying to get off the hook of that transferring of the intent.
Yeah, that also raises why people do plea deals and find new and creative ways to cooperate with the government when the bad guys get caught. And on one level, he does do a huge favor for the New Republic with the three biological individuals who were involved in this conspiracy and raiding the New Republic transport ship. So
He's
yeah,
been of substantial assistance to the government.
yeah, I would hang my hat on that for trying to represent him. It's like, hey, you can say he really did withdraw and
Yeah.
and gift wrapped the the assailants for you. Um, yeah, because again, it was represented to him that there wasn't any living person on board the ship, and there was an open disagreement with killing the human pilot.
Yeah, and the other issue is going to be uh, yeah, a defense like that is going to require him to put on evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And security cam footage, holocam footage might be available there. Whether they have audio is another story for that type of space. But if you just look at, if it's just testimony, it's him against all the co-conspirators that hate him, uh, but didn't die and have every reason to lie. And so, what's the jury going to do? Believe the guy that's trying to save his own skin? Believe the four people that hate his guts and want to save their own skin, but all have probably the same story? They probably lie and have their own tale of it. So it'd be a tough position. Um,
It really turns on what the black box would show, because if it's just audio, okay, that solves it.
right.
If it's audio and video, where you see guns drawn and pointed at each other and Mandalorian trying to defuse the situation, I mean, like, that cuts in his favor.
Yeah.
So it just the electronically stored information would be mission critical for his defense, and showing he did not want this to happen and tried to defuse the situation.
Yeah. And it is very interesting that I think this is less of a moral line for the Mandalorian than it is one of just practicality. I don't think he necessarily has a problem with killing somebody like this, but I think practically speaking, with the cargo that he's carrying, he can't afford to bring this down on him. And while the New Republic might overlook a few droids dead or destroyed and a prisoner gone, they're not going to overlook a a dead prison guard.
No, as soon as you kill a federal officer, they all of that's out the window. Of that's no longer a mulligan
Mm-hmm.
situation. It's, yeah, not okay. Which brings us to, did the Mandalorian withdraw from the conspiracy? And you've outlined this, so why don't you share your thoughts?
So abandonment or withdrawal are both defenses to conspiracy. They're known as affirmative defenses, which means that unlike your normal criminal defense where you can just sit cloaked in the presumption of innocence and not have to put a shred of evidence on, no testimony, no evidence, and you can be found not guilty, to get the benefit of this defense, in other words, for the jury to actually be able to consider whether you abandoned or withdrew from the conspiracy, you have to put on a baseline bit of evidence so that the jury can even be instructed on that defense. And what the defendant has to show is that, one, he affirmatively communicated his withdrawal to the co-conspirators, and two, and it's got to be both, that he took some positive action to withdraw from the conspiracy. And he's got to have withdrawn from the conspiracy prior to its completion. That's really important, and what I think kind of dooms the Mandalorian here in a sense. We go back to that showdown Reservoir style, or Reservoir Dog style, in that command room. I don't know that he necessarily communicated that he was out of the whole conspiracy. I think he was negotiating a different way to handle the situation, which probably would have involved stunning or restraining the guard. Mayfeld definitely had a different way of dealing with the whole situation, and it was readily apparent he wanted to kill the guard. But I don't think Mando actually withdrew from the conspiracy. I mean, that would say it's got to be it's got to be clear. It can't be in a gray area, and it's got to be an unequivocal withdrawal. In other words, hey, I am done with this. You guys do whatever you want with this guard, but I'm done. I'm getting out of here. And he's actually got to leave, or in this case, walk away. I don't think he doesn't do either of those. he is trying to figure out a different way to handle the situation, but he stays right there. And more importantly, even after they kill Davin, what does he do? He continues helping them with the prison break. That's going to really, really cut in his defense when the jury sees holocam footage of him breaking Quinn out of his prison cell.
Yeah, and it's tough to say you abandoned the conspiracy because you got locked in the prison cell. That's the conspiracy abandoning you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, a few issues there. Now, there's another reason for liability, and that's the felony murder rule, and you've raised the issue. So let's enlighten everyone for those who have not enjoyed criminal law back in law school.
Yeah. This is actually a bit of a controversial uh, segment of criminal law, and it's come up relatively recently in the news. The idea is that you can have a murder during the commission of a serious offense, so a prison break, for example, and have a guard that gets killed, like Davin, and that crime of murder will be extended out, the liability for it at least, beyond the person who pulled the trigger or threw the vibro knife. And what you have to have is a killing that happens during the commission of a dangerous, or in some cases, they're actually enumerated crimes within a statute. So it might be, robbery, like a violent robbery, or bank robbery, something like that. Usually, a lot of the crimes involve when something is getting stolen, because so often you have these violent thefts that happen, and somebody gets hurt along the way. If those conditions are met, not only is the offender guilty of murder, but the offender's accomplices or co-conspirators can also be found guilty. And it goes back to that concept that we were talking about just a few minutes ago about transferred intent, where that person, the actual killer, his malicious intent is applied to any consequences of the crime, no matter how unintended. And so when the Mandalorian agrees to go on this prison break, it's an inherently dangerous act. It's absolutely foreseeable, and you heard him express his concerns about it before they left on the mission, that this is really dangerous. It's going to bring a lot of heat down. He knew the risks, and so when Davin gets killed, this is not something that's completely out of left field for him. Now, in most jurisdictions, that underlying offense has to be there has to be a foreseeable danger to life. In other words, there's got to be a connection between that murder, the offense, and by that I mean that, like, the bigger crime that's being committed, and the actual murder. Well, when you're engaged in a prison break, the odds that somebody could get killed, say a prison guard, in the commission of that act are pretty foreseeable. There's a tight linkage there. Mandalorian is going to argue, hey, well, the guys told me the whole intel was that this is an unmanned ship. Goes back to whether the jury is actually going to believe that. I mean, did you seriously believe that the New Republic would have nobody on this ship aside from droids, with the kind of prisoners we have aboard? Depending on what jurisdiction you're in, there's also there's a pair of theories that might apply. One's called the agency theory. The other is called the proximate cause theory. Agency theory is you as a co-conspirator are liable only for deaths caused by agents of the crime. That would apply here. So Jian is the one that threw the knife and killed Davin. She's a co-conspirator. She's an agent of the crime, so therefore Mando can be held liable. Proximate cause can get you on the hook for any death, including those that are caused by bystanders or police, so long as they meet the proximate cause test. Basically, they're looking for a tight linkage between the death and the crime. Was it foreseeable that this could happen? This popped up in the news recently. There was a shootout that happened after, I think, a robbery. One of the young co-conspirators was charged with felony murder. because one of his his other co-conspirators was shot and killed by police uh, as they were in a gunfight following the robbery. And the question was whether it's fair for him to be charged with that murder, considering the police did the actual killing. I don't know what we have here, but if the proximate cause theory were there, he might be like, assuming Quinn died aboard that space station at the hands of the X-wing pilots there at the end, he might be on the hook for Quinn's death if it was foreseeable.
Yeah. Oh, using the homing beacon to take out those who wronged him. I mean, it's not a Western concept. It's going, because they didn't have those in the Old West. But diverting a force to knock out a group potentially hostile to you has been done before, and it worked well. I found it very, very entertaining to see that happen. Uh, don't get me wrong, A+ for effort. So that
Yeah,
was delightful.
I love his
But
question.
yeah,
Are those X-wings? Meanwhile, Davin is like backing away and hands in the remote.
yeah, trying to get to an escape pod before it's too late.
Yeah.
How do I get out of this alive? Yeah, as a side note, I really did love that hangar. That hangar just screams Star Wars on so
Oh
many
yeah.
levels of people working on spaceships and engines and just all that clutter and everything. It's magnificent glory of a pure Star Wars element.
And Josh,
Uh,
you had a good observation after the episode aired, saying that the station looked really familiar, like ones we've seen in the Clone Wars. And I think there's a little difference because I went back after you raised that, and you see in a few episodes of the Clone Wars, and I think one episode of Rebels where they go to salvage one. There are these medical stations, the Haven class medical stations that you see. It might be one of those, and I love the idea. I mean, this place is like clearly rusted out. I like that if it's the same class station, that this is a relic of the Republic, and it's being used decades later by marauders to run their criminal operation out of.
that and even if it's not an old medical station, it could still have been manufactured by the same company.
Yeah,
Just as you can tell what a Ford is by looking at it,
right.
or types of aircraft. It's like, okay, that's definitely a U.S. Air Force type
Hmm.
plane because they look similar, and it's like okay, that Boeing made that, like
Yeah.
that type of reaction. And I had that with this episode of like, God, that's super familiar. We might not have seen it exactly, like with the droid Zero. It's like, God, that's familiar
Yeah.
looking. We've seen lots of droids, and I was trying to remember what elements have we seen of this before, because it's so familiar. And uh, again, just loving the fans. Well, let's talk about the X-wings deciding to open fire on the space station. Is that like when you think about rules of engagement? So they got the beacon that says something bad just happened,
Hmm.
and they can see a gunship getting ready to launch. You've done rules of engagement analysis. What's your thought on this?
This is actually something this is my favorite part of the entire episode, not just because Dave Filoni was the lead pilot, who was amazingly named Trapper Wolf, which is the best Star Wars name in existence. But you have this interesting cross section because the rebels that we've seen, or even the New Republic that we've seen uh, at any other point, is a military force, right? They're going toe to toe with another military, the Galactic Empire. But think about what those X-wing pilots are doing here. It's a law enforcement function. They're responding to a prison break. there's a reason you don't see the United States Air Force scramble F-22 Raptors when like Cletus breaks out of the local prison there near Lackland Air Force Base in Virginia, right? The military doesn't typically get involved with domestic law enforcement operations. There's a whole concept called the Posse Comitatus Act that really clamps down on the military's ability to get involved with domestic law enforcement operations. So I really want to know what in the world the New Republic's structure for dealing with this is. Are these just normal rebel pilots? Have they created like a special, I don't know, like a space police force to go around and handle law enforcement matters? If it's the military, and there's no distinction, right? They're not coming on the radio and declaring themselves as anything other than just normal rebel pilots, or normal New Republic pilots, that is, then you're having the military performing a law enforcement function, which can happen. It's unusual in America, but it can happen. When you have situations like that, you're not operating under the normal law of war, law of armed conflict, because there is no armed conflict. Instead, what you've got are this set of rules called the rules for the use of force, or the RUF. And these are typically in play in domestic type situations. For example, soldiers that are stationed along the United States-Mexico border right now probably have some version of the RUF in place that are set and shaped by their commanders to let them know when they can use force. Going back to the aftermath of Katrina, when you had some elements of the United States Army that got deployed down to New Orleans for cleanup operations down there, they had their own RUF. In fact, there's like a famous picture of paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne that are patrolling through the sort of half-flooded streets of New Orleans. And if you look closely at their M16s and M4s, none of them have magazines in. So in other words, none of them have any bullets in their weapons. And that would go back to that RUF. So going back to the Star Wars universe here, a normal RUF is going to really depend on where you're operating, but it's going to take into account certain key elements. One's going to be the right to self-defense. So you've got the right to defend yourself against certain threats. Typically with rules for the use of force in domestic operations, you've got a real restriction on the amount of force that you can use. So typically it has to be the minimum force necessary to achieve your objective or to defend yourself. And unlike the law of war, or like in a combat zone, the use of deadly force really can only be justified by extreme necessity. And I think that's where we find our pilots, is this self-defense. Because if you notice, as they come out of hyperspace, they don't immediately start firing on this space station. It's not like they say, oh, we've got a lock on the tracking beacon, open fire. It's not until that gunship fires up. And that's what's so beautiful about this whole sequence, is that Ranzar thinks that he's got the Mandalorian right where he wants him. He fires up his like fancy looking gunship. My wife was even like, oh, that ship's fancy. What is that all about? And I was like, oh, just wait. I don't think you're going to see much of it. And that sort of clear demonstration of hostile intent on the part of that gunship was all those X-Wing pilots needed. It didn't look like they destroyed the whole station, so they cleaned up that hangar pretty well. I don't think Quinn survived, but that would have been the framework that they would have been using, the RUF.
Well, we didn't see them keep doing like multiple sorties upon it. Like we do see a second pass happening as the credits start rolling. So they might have finished it off.
That's true.
So it's all right. Use the proton torpedoes, and there she goes.
File a complaint with Hosnian Prime.
Yes, we just don't take any crap anymore. So there's that. I have another thought with the Posse Comitatus and in the military doing law enforcement. Given the nature of space and the armaments that this gang had, maybe they fell more into the category of pirate, because
Yeah.
we have had military force, whether it's, against Somalia in recent years, or, the Barbary pilots or pirates out of Tripoli and during Thomas Jefferson's administration,
Hmm.
of we've gone toe to toe with pirates and had the military, take out pirate ships and pirate bases. This could be similar to that. And
Definitely.
going like, yeah, it's like, wow, so there's a space station, they're conducting operations, and they're launching a gunship at us. You kids have a nice day. And it's target practice. And especially in the early days of the Republic, if they are trying to um, have a stable government that doesn't fall, being aggressive and taking out threats such as that might not be a bad thing, in order to ensure the government and actually one works in providing domestic tranquility and safety, in making sure that crime-ridden elements do not thrive.
What was really interesting to that point, because I think your finger is right on the pulse, that this is something we've seen it. We've seen it in Rebels, that piracy abroad is a big problem in the galaxy, and certainly in the vacuum of power that the Empire would have left, I think it would have only spread across the galaxy. But two things sort of stood out to me, given the point in galactic history we're at right now. One, this alarm gets tripped and they have a 20-minute response time. I mean, if the police took 20 minutes to respond to like much of anything, it's all over at that point. So that says a lot about the New Republic's response capability. Because at this point in history, if you've read sort of some of the outside materials, Mon Mothma, who you know from Return of the Jedi and Revenge of the Sith and Rogue One, as the Chancellor of the New Republic, as the Galactic Civil War ended, she disbanded the Alliance's military for the most part. It severely scaled it back. There was this thing called the Military Disarmament Act. So they didn't carry this massive fleet onward after the Empire was disabled, or dismantled rather. And so that 20-minute response time fits into that. And then what actually responds? 3 T-65 X-Wings. They haven't even upgraded their equipment in 4, 5, 6 years since Return of the Jedi, and they can't even muster something like a Corellian Corvette or some other light small capital ship. I mean, it's 3 starfighters to respond to what should be a high value target to defend. Maybe that's just a call, hey, send a scout team out, but I suspect it has more to do with their military shortfalls than anything.
Again, there's lots of room to discuss this. So first off, space is big. So a 20-minute
Right.
response time, not bad. I mean, given like it's like we couldn't get to the moon in 20 minutes. It's like, sorry, even if we had the capability, it's gonna take 3 days. Sorry. Try to stay alive. So like that doesn't seem that offensive. I actually thought like, oh, that's not bad considering the vacuum of space, the distance involved,
Right.
and what they have. And as to the amount of force deployed with 3 X-wings, they might have something the equivalent of a escort carrier, that's out on a patrol, and that's what launched the 3 X-wings, as opposed to let's scramble the fleet. And 3 fighters, maybe that was what they thought was the legitimate force to use, as opposed to sending in a destroyer
Yeah.
to the situation. And like that's also what could have been near. Now granted, the cameos for the directors, because again, this is where we get 3 directors doing cameos, and God bless all of them. Like if you're doing like the pitch meeting, it's like, okay, so this is where we can have some cameos. You guys want to be on the bridge of a Corvette, or do you want to be X-wing pilots? All of them are going to say X-wing pilots. It's like,
very true.
It's like, no, I want the jumpsuit. I want the helmet. We only need 1 cockpit that we can use 3 times. when we film this is bitchin', let's do it this way. Like the 5-year-old in me totally sees the logic of what they did, and just like set wise
Yeah.
of like,
Yeah.
okay, we don't have to build a big set. We just get a cockpit. We probably have them left over from the movies that have been made. So let's just go with it. Lean in, go. And I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like almost yelled. It was like 4 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning Friday when I was watching this for the first time. I saw Filoni come on screen. I was like, oh, had to cover my mouth up. But
So,
yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. And I'm fully cognizant of the fact that it took 3 X-wings to destroy the Death Star of all things. So it's not like those are insignificant, uh, combat response forces.
yeah, and it's the cool factor. It's like,
Yeah.
the people doing the special effects just as easily could have made a Hammerhead Corvette,
Yeah.
come in and launch some missiles at the station. And again, part of that would be cool, but when you're thinking about your inner 5-year-old, what do you want to do? Do you want to be flying the X-wing or one of the capital ships? They're going to go for the X-wing pilot. They're going to
Yeah.
go for the hot rod. And like when I watched it, I did the early morning watch on my phone. I didn't have my glasses on, so like initially didn't realize it was Filoni,
Oh
and
yeah.
then I watched it the second time, a little later in the day. It's like, oh, that's cute. Oh, and his name's Wolf. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
that totally makes
Of
sense.
course.
Uh, I again, all three of them, with Deborah Chow. It's like, okay, that's super awesome. That's just so cool.
Yeah.
Uh, Here's some news that just came in because I saw an alert on my phone, and that's that Kathleen Kennedy says future Star Wars films will move away from trilogies, as we're seeing with The Mandalorian. Good one-act story could do just as
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
So just make a good movie. That's all that we ask.
Yeah, I mean, the MCU proved that you do not need, you can have an arc that extends beyond the traditional trilogy mantle or model rather.
Yeah, or you do one movie and then a sequel. It's like there's
Yeah.
all kinds of ways to do this. So yeah, we're in a golden age, and
Trapper
uh,
Wolf, a Star Wars story. Give us what we want.
yeah, it's just
It's just Dave Filoni doing Dave Filoni things in an X-wing for an hour and a half.
wee.
Hey, I'm gonna
People
fire
would
some proton torpedoes.
wee. People would love it just because this is us.
Yeah.
We all see ourselves getting to do that sort of thing. So, uh, ah, glorious, glorious. So yeah, we're 2 episodes left, and we haven't seen that Grand Moff yet. So there's, I don't know if we'll get a two-parter to finish this off, or if it will be what the formula will be. But we're moving, and again, this has just been so much fun being able to uh, you know, analyze a Star Wars TV show each week.
Yeah. Well, and this week, we're all barely gonna have time to digest Wednesday's episode before we're hit with the Rise of Skywalker Thursday and Friday.
Yeah, this will be a busy week, and we also have Star Wars Resistance, and I haven't watched the new episode yet,
It's very good.
and yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Again, we have a movie, we have a TV series, and we have an animated series. In 1980, I did not believe anything like this would happen. So this is a wonderful world that we live in.
Indeed.
So let's see now. How are you seeing Rise of Skywalker?
So on Thursday, the I wanted to go to one of those AMC marathons and subject my body to the extraordinary marathon that they're putting on, but there wasn't one that was doing it close to me. So there's the IMAX close to me is doing a 5 o'clock fan event, which is just their earliest showing of it. So I'm going with my brother-in-law. He reached out to me. He's taken the entire day off, which makes me want to like forfeit my Star Wars fan card, because I feel like I've planned things out inadequately. But we're going to meet up ahead of time. We're going to play Star Wars Rebellion, the Fantasy Flight board game, to sort of get in the mood, and then we'll go see that. And then Friday after work, I'm hauling down to uh, Northern Virginia to the Air and Space Museum Annex. They have like a very specialized IMAX there with a very, very nice, fancy digital projection system, and I'm going to see it a second time with a good friend of mine down there, and then promptly turning around the next morning and coming back. What about you?
Yeah. So I'm going to see it Thursday with my cousin, and I'm a year and 2 days older than him. So we grew up playing with Star Wars toys and had joint birthday parties together because, again, birthdays 2 days apart. And I'm seeing it at the theater that was actually my first job. So where I worked in high school. But on top of that, it's right by the Shoreline Amphitheater. And back in 1977, 78, that used to be a drive-in theater. And that's where I saw Star Wars when I was, 3 to 4, depending on the month. And so I do have very foggy memories of seeing it at that drive-in. So I'm trying to go back to where it all began.
Yeah. Very fitting.
It's close. It's close because, again, the drive-in doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So, but it's the closest thing to where the drive-in was. That's now a 16 theater movie theater that in the early 1990s, I used to go there wearing, the polyester vest and clip-on bow tie, and
the manager's gonna come out and be like, Josh, you haven't called out in 20 years. Quick, put on the vest and the tie. We gotta get you behind the counter to scoop some popcorn. We got a big movie releasing.
that would be kind of therapeutic, actually. I would do. I mean, not that I want to do Popcorn Boy again, but the working the I was, when they learned I could add, I ended up being a cashier at a snack bar, and ultimately I was good at it, so they moved me to the box office.
You have a tangible skill.
I do, yeah. It's just, it was fun. It was a good gig. I did it all of high school, and I got to see movies early, and
nice.
I learned how to splice film. So
Very
I
cool.
trained to be a projectionist, and granted, things you don't necessarily put together reels of film anymore because frequently, I think almost always digital now, but learned how to do that. And that was, after you do that, you'd have to watch it to make sure it worked. So you would do basically an 11:30 or midnight screening with like 2 people there just to make sure everything was hunky-dory.
They're yelling. They're like, what do we have, a projectionist in training up there?
Yes, it was fun. So it was good memories. So
have you, at this late point, so we've got just a few days left, are you cut off from spoilers? Are you, and by that I don't mean like an actual spoiler, but I mean, are you watching any more of the little featurettes or commercials that they're releasing?
No, I stopped that like 2 weeks ago. I was actually really upset that they've kept the marketing blitz up.
Yeah.
Because when they announced the tickets going on sale, what was that, month and a half, 2 months ago, and they took the position of like, this is the final TV spot. It's like, okay, good. The fact they've kept pumping out stuff, it's like, stop it. It's like, it's just, no, I want to see it in the movie theater. I don't want its surprises ruined. Stop it.
Yeah.
And I don't know who in the marketing department's scared for their job, but it's like, you have enough material that's already been released to market. You don't need to put out more plot points or surprises, because that ruins the movie going experience. They didn't do this with Last Jedi.
Yeah, that's true. I to some degree, I think it's a course correction, maybe an overcorrection from Solo, where you had, at least around my neck of the woods in Pennsylvania, I don't think I saw any TV spots, very few. And now I think they've released, leading up to the Rise of Skywalker this past week, it seemed like every day they've had a new little 15 to 30-second commercial. There was, I think on Friday, that sort of secret, quote unquote, but not so secret Amazon special that came out. There was what I thought was like a fairly spoilery minute and a half, like Kylo Ren focused um, trailer that came out last week. That I watched that and I was like, that was the line in the sand for me. I was like, okay, no more, because that was uncharacteristically revealing for Abrams. I mean, it could be all a misdirection, but I watched that and I was like, oh, that was awesome, but I also kind of regret it. So no more for me either.
Yeah, and yeah, that stuff drives me nuts. I understand marketing. Like I've done a good part of that in my career in helping market software companies. I get
Mm-hmm.
that. But for the love of God, stop this. Like a movie's supposed to be a surprise. They didn't like show I Am Your Father in 1980. Like they didn't do that.
Right.
So and watching like Empire of Dreams on Disney Plus, showing like the making of, like the lengths that they took, even having the false script that initially said like you don't know the truth, Kenobi killed your father, like
Mm-hmm.
that was in the script, and then when they were filming it's like, okay, this is what's actually going to happen. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That is like CIA level, like false information to keep a surprise, because that's the movie going experience. And I really am not comfortable with all the number of featurettes that they keep putting out, because I'm avoiding those, because I want to go and I want to enjoy it and I want to love the experience and I want to be surprised. Like that's why we go. Like they didn't Last Jedi, they didn't show the throne room scene in the trailers. Like
Mm-hmm.
they did, and people cheered because like it was like, that's awesome, and it was one of the best fight scenes in Star Wars ever, hands down. Do that. It's just,
Yeah.
let the movie speak for itself. So I don't know if they're just nervous. I don't know if they're trying to make the rubble bounce with, let's like see how many records that we could set. Are they trying to break Endgame's record? Like is Disney trying to like, spike the football twice
Mm-hmm.
with, it's like, oh, Marvel did this, or is everyone at Lucas going like, hey, let's try this and see what happens? Um, that'd be a hell of a move. Uh,
Yeah.
and Disney's board of directors should be ecstatic at year end when you think of both Endgame and Rise of Skywalker. So
Yeah. And interestingly, both Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams were interviewed about the decision to reveal like Palpatine's involvement, whatever that may be. And she said that they made a decision kind of early on, back, around the time of Celebration in April of this year, that they didn't want to be coy. They weren't trying to hide anything about it. They also weren't trying to give away the whole movie. And clearly, we have no idea what or how he's involved. They haven't revealed all that. But um, part of me thinks that to some extent, you know, I think it's a minority of fans, but the very vocal folks that really disliked The Last Jedi have been crowing enough and upset enough. And I don't want to dismiss any complaints, because like there are folks that like are respectful but legitimately just do not like the movie, and that's absolutely fair. But that there was enough discontent that they wanted some sort of unifying reveal that would get everybody talking in a positive manner. And I don't think there's anybody in the Star Wars fandom that hates Palpatine as a character. And so to reveal that bit of the story and keep whatever arc is behind his character a secret, I think the judgment was there that on some level, hey, let's give a unifying cheer moment. And that's exactly what that was. I remember when that first trailer came out at Celebration, and I was standing amongst, a few thousand fans all packed together, and the moment his voice came out, or it might have been his cackle, I can't remember the end of that first trailer, everybody all at once just looked at each other and freaked out. So I
Well,
think it's a balance there.
yeah. Well, and the Palpatine play, uh, I would have preferred it as a surprise big picture,
Right.
but I think they had to win people back after Last Jedi because of the split that took place.
Yeah, I think
And
that definitely factored into it to some degree, whether they'll admit it or not.
yeah, it's they realize we have to play to our strengths and to fan service and what people like and what people
Mhm.
want. And again, just a lot of mixed feelings there. Now, it does raise the issue, I think, for Star Wars Celebration 2020 next August, that this is when they could be rolling out what future stories,
Mhm.
releases might be taking place. Because it's odd for them to do two celebrations back to back.
Yeah.
So, and if they're again doing the victory lap with Rise of Skywalker and saying like, okay, we're gonna have new ideas going forward that's different than the Skywalker family. This would make sense to get people excited and looking forward to the future with whatever stories
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and whether they're again I always take news with a grain of salt, saying like, "Hey, no more trilogies." Really? Do you really mean that? Um, again, maybe it's two parts, maybe it's four. I don't know, but let the story dictate, and I think they'll do that because they figured out how to make billions of dollars, and they spent billions on the property and then building Galaxy's Edge. So, yeah, they want this baby to continue to thrive and be successful. Because the idea of when you look at the capital investment to make Rise of the Resistance, that can't be like a 2-year investment. They want
Right.
that ride to be there for decades that people will go and enjoy.
Yeah.
So, like, you can't have a short-term exhibit,
Yeah.
and because we're like revamping it, it's like, okay, let's go spend $1 billion redoing this. That's a tough thing to imagine a company doing.
Yeah. It's a good point. I think it is odd to have, I don't think they, other than having a domestic celebration and a Europe celebration back to back in consecutive years, they have not, so far as I know, done back to back celebrations in the US one year after the other. So I was surprised by that. I think we'll get a Kenobi trailer, potentially, maybe just a teaser. Cassian Andor series will have started shooting by then, so they might slap together something there. I think we'll definitely get a Mandalorian season 2 trailer, if not a premiere of the first episode or first 2 episodes. And then, quite frankly, I don't need another movie trailer at that point. I don't want them to rush something into production just to feed the fans there. Quite frankly, if they gave a Marvel style Hall H panel where they're bringing out creators and whatnot and sort of revealing the next plans, even if it's just logos and whatnot, I think that's cool. And if you're going to throw in some Disney Plus projects along the way into that bigger timeline, I think fans will be happy. I'll be happy.
I, I would be ecstatic. It's like we have like this is an observation about the sequel trilogy is there are too many characters, so it's really hard to like get to know a specific character and have a story that gives them justice. So like Last Jedi, I feel Finn was sidelined a
Mm-hmm.
lot, and like you could do a Poe and Finn story and like where they're the leads, and
Right.
maybe there's a couple, you throw in BB-8 and another couple characters for their adventure together, and I think that would be a ton of fun. The idea of like being done with Rey entirely, that seems a waste. It's this feeling of and I think Mark Hamill like summed it up after Return of the Jedi. It's like Luke could still have other stories to tell. Like there's
Yeah.
this like you've gotten through the growing phase.
Mm-hmm.
Like show them in their prime, going on adventures, doing whatever, and I think that would make people very happy. Uh,
Yeah.
on the flip, on the flip side, I'm ecstatic to have Star Wars TV. The episodic storytelling allows them to do more. And I mean, the movie should be spectacle, and Star Wars does belong on the big screen. But Star Wars on the small screen was proven with Clone Wars, Rebels, and Resistance. You can tackle big issues over the course of a season that you couldn't explore in a movie as easily.
Yeah.
So it's take the lessons from Star Trek. Star Trek as episodes in the TV series, they covered a lot and a lot of great important issues. Movies, when they swung for the fences and were focused on making a movie, it was a home run. If they were basically making a long episode, it fell flat. And Star Wars needs to keep that in mind of this is what we can do as an episode, this is what could be done as a movie, and just focus on that. So I'm very optimistic. I'm excited again, we got tickets for Celebration, and we've never talked about how we coordinated that since I was the first one into the, out of the waiting room.
Yeah.
with,
That
with,
was hair raising.
yeah, I'm in. So, and yeah, I got technically four. And it's like you and your dad, our buddy Steve, and myself. Like it's like I'm in, and PayPal transactions happening as we all, yeah, like that was so cool to pull
Yeah.
that off. Um, and yeah, like with Steve being like he was in the Grand Canyon and he's like, oh, text it, I'll get it later. It's like there isn't time. And, again, so that's an adventure, and hopefully we'll get a panel there. So
Yeah.
uh, I'm excited to. I feel like there's a gameplay there that they did this in Anaheim for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, one way or the other, there's not been a single celebration that I've been to, and this will be my fifth that hasn't been a blast. And I count two of those were pre-Disney celebrations where the best new content that we could hope for was a new series of or a new season of the Clone Wars, and at least for Celebration 5 back in 2010, the big ticket panel all weekend was George Lucas talking about the Blu-ray release, and that that entire weekend was a ton of fun. So whatever they do for this one, whether they have any big time trailers or not, it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it, and we've got a good crew going out there.
Absolutely. The other side of it is this will be my first celebration. I've been rejected twice, but this will be the not at all heard about that. This will be fun having a group of friends going, and there'll be several thousand other people just like us who also
Yeah.
love this material, and that's the beauty of any show. And I've mentioned this before, but I highly recommend the November Fire documentary Back to Space Con about the first Star Trek convention that was in the San Francisco Bay Area, and how after 1977, Star Wars was incorporated into that because the fan base was a circle for a Venn diagram. It's like everyone who it's like, again, it's like, oh, I like Star Trek and I like Planet of the Apes, I like Space 1999, and oh look, here's this, because the 70s were a wild, weird time for sci-fi fans. There was some weird stuff that came out, experimental college films. There was some weird stuff. but it was creative and different. And that fan base kept the lights on. And here we
Yeah.
are today. And again, I'm super excited, just as I am for WonderCon and San Diego Comic Con this year. It's going to be 2020 will be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So with that, thank you all for tuning in. This will be we'll definitely do a Rise of Skywalker series as well. So like that won't go unnoticed. Don't worry. And please check us out on our Patreon. So I've been doing some Patreon content. There's now, I think, 4 mini podcasts there. And we'll keep doing at least 1 or 2 a week for as we get that up and running. And if you enjoy our show, please leave a review, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever else you enjoy your podcasts. And again, thank you all for tuning in, and stay geeky. Stay geeky, America.